The Reens sang to their dead. They had 17 different songs, one for each kind of grief, and I had memorized all of them before their fourth day ended. That was my job. That was the only reason the Vreth kept me breathing. I am Sevareth. I am Keth. My people surrendered to the Vreth 211 years ago, and in those 2 centuries I learned what survival requires. You make yourself useful. You make yourself small. You take the end of other people's worlds and you translate it into clean, professional language, and you do not think too hard about what that makes you. You keep your head down. You keep your hands still. You forget the things that would make stillness impossible. The Vreth flagship Dominion moved through the dark above the Reen homeworld like a blade through still water. I stood at the observation deck beside Commander Vrathsal and watched the planet below shift color. The unmaking frequency does that. It hits the atmosphere at the right resonance and something in the light changes, goes flat, like a photograph of a place rather than the place itself, like all the life drains out of the image while you are still looking at it. 41, Vrathsal said. He was not talking to me, he was talking to the number. I did not respond. The science behind the frequency is not complicated, not once you understand what the Vreth discovered 3 centuries before they found my people. Every sentient species in the known galaxy shares a common neurological architecture at the deepest level. The Vreth called it the consensus root, a cluster of structures deep in the brain that handle meaning, motivation, the basic circuitry of wanting things and fighting for them. The frequency does not cause pain. It does not cause fear. It causes something far more effective than either. It causes the quiet, the gray, the soft, terrible flatness where ambition used to live, the sense that none of it matters enough to fight for. Every species hits the consensus root the same way because every species built their minds on the same ancient biological foundation. The Vreth did not invent the weapon so much as discover the one lock that fits every door in the galaxy. And in 3 centuries of expansion, they had never encountered a door it did not open. I watched the Reens communication networks light up below. Panic first, always panic first. Their signal traffic spiked into chaos within hours, a million voices asking the same question in 17 different dialects. Then the grief phase hit and the singing started. Beautiful, actually. Even filtered through the fleet's audio receivers, the sound had a texture that I had to force myself to stop listening to. It had weight in it. The kind of weight you feel in the chest before you learn to stop feeling things in your chest. Then, right on schedule, the singing slowed. The Reens government sent a formal message on day 4. I translated it for Vrathsal. It took 9 minutes. It was a request for terms. There were sections of it that felt like apology, directed inward at their own people rather than outward at us. The kind of apology a parent offers a child for something the parent could not prevent, which is the worst kind, because it knows its own uselessness and says the words anyway. I translated it faithfully, the way I translate everything, which is to say I made it clean and professional and removed the parts that would have made a Vreth commander feel something inconvenient. Forward their representative coordinates to the administrative vessel, Vrathsal said. I forwarded them. The Reen homeworld began its integration process within the week. The Vreth do not destroy what they conquer. Destruction is waste. A living, functional civilization produces resources, fills administrative roles, provides labor, and pays into the imperial structure. The Vreth are, above everything else, practical. They do not hate the species they conquer. You do not hate a door for being locked. You simply open it and walk through. I am also practical. This is what I tell myself. After the Reen mission concluded, I returned to my quarters aboard the flagship. Standard accommodations for a Tier 2 auxiliary, a bunk, a data terminal, a narrow viewport that faced nothing interesting. I sat at the terminal and opened the briefing for the next assignment. New coordinates. Edge of the Orion Spur, a small blue-white planet circling an ordinary yellow star. The survey file was thin. The xenobiology team had flagged it as Category 7, abundant resources, manageable population density, minimal projected resistance. The initial survey described the dominant species in brief clinical terms. highly varied, multiple languages, multiple governments, a long, extensively documented history of internal conflict. The survey team noted that the species had been at war with itself, in various configurations, for the entirety of its recorded history. The Xenopsychology Division considered this a positive indicator. Internal conflict, they noted, was a predictor of faster surrender, not slower. A species already divided and exhausted by its own fighting would have fewer reserves to draw on when the frequency hit. They included a confidence rating of 94%. Someone on the bridge had already started calling the planet the Marble. I heard this through the corridor as I walked back from the commissary. It was not a cruel name. It was simply a small name for what they assumed would be a small problem. I sat at my terminal and read the file 3 times. I am not sure why. I had read 41 similar files before this one and read each of them once. Something was sitting at the back of my mind that I could not name. Not worry. I trained worry out of myself a long time ago. Something older than worry. Something with almost no words left attached to it, the way a path gets when nobody uses it for long enough. I filed the briefing. I told myself it would be 42. The marble had a name. I learned from a secondary survey attachment buried at the bottom of the file. Its inhabitants called it Earth. I do not remember the word my people had for grief. I have been useful for too long. The frequency hit the marble on the 9th day of our approach. Standard deployment. Full spectrum broadcast across the northern hemisphere first, then the southern. Vrathsal stood at the central bridge display with his hands behind his back and the expression he always wore when something was already decided. I sat at my monitoring station and watched the human communication networks react. Panic, right on schedule. Their signal traffic spiked within 3 hours. I could not understand most of it yet. The translation software was still building its base models from intercepted samples, working through the remarkable variety of languages a single planet had somehow produced. But the shape of panic is the same in every language. Short bursts, overlapping transmissions. The same questions repeated in 100 different forms from 100 different places at once. I logged it, phase 1 confirmed. On day 3, the grief phase should have begun settling. The frequency deepens at this stage. The initial panic burns itself out, and what replaces it is the quiet, spreading through the population like weather. I watched the data and noted that the grief was measurable and real. The neurological stress markers were well within expected parameters. The frequency was working. I marked the report confirmed and moved on. Then something in the data caught my eye. There was a pattern running underneath the grief signal, not replacing it, not fighting it, running alongside it, like a second river current moving in a different direction within the same body of water. I ran it through 6 comparison models from the Xenopsychology database. 5 returned no match. The 6th returned a partial result for a species archived under the designation KR07, a civilization that the Vreth had made contact with approximately 600 years prior. KR07 no longer existed in the current record. The archive had no documentation of a Vreth conquest. It had no negotiation file, no integration report, no administrative handover. The species appeared in the historical database and then simply stopped appearing. The file ended mid-sentence the way a transmission ends when something cuts the signal. I sat with that for a while. Then I filed my monitoring report, flagged the secondary pattern as a data anomaly requiring further analysis, and closed the window. I did not push it, old habit, old well-practiced habit. Day 6 was when the schedule broke. On day 6, the negotiation phase was supposed to begin. 41 civilizations had reached this point on roughly similar timelines. The grief peaks, the quiet deepens, and then the governing bodies open a channel and ask for terms. It is as reliable as orbital mechanics, as predictable as the way water behaves when you apply enough heat. The humans did not ask for terms. Instead, their governments started talking to each other. This sounds unremarkable until you understand what I mean precisely. These were not allied governments. Several of them had been in formal states of military conflict with each other within the last century. Some were still involved in ongoing disputes at the point of our arrival, and on day 6, after 6 days of frequency exposure, they began coordinating, sharing data, building something together on a communication infrastructure that was rerouting around damaged nodes and reconstructing itself as I watched, growing new pathways around every break like a vine finding light through a collapsed wall. Vrathsal summoned me to the bridge. He stood at the central display with both hands behind his back, watching the human communication map with an expression that was not worry, because Vreth commanders do not worry, but which resembled worry in all the ways that matter structurally. "Explain this," he said. I looked at the display. I had no explanation in any of my 41 missions worth of xenopsychology models. I had never said the following sentence in my career. "I don't know," I said. Vrathsal looked at me for a moment. Then he looked back at the display. "Recalibrate your models," he said. I recalibrated my models. The models continued to not explain what I was seeing. On day 9, a human transmission reached the fleet. It was not encrypted. It was not targeted at any specific receiver. It was broadcast on an open frequency, aimed deliberately outward, toward wherever we were. The bridge crew handed it to me. I worked through it carefully. The translation software had enough of their primary languages by now to produce reliable output. The transmission described, in plain language, what the frequency had done to their population, what it felt like from the inside. The description was precise and clinical and not dramatic, and it made me stop twice while translating because the precision of it was unexpected. This was not a distress call. It was documentation. Someone had recorded the experience of the frequency and wanted us to know they understood exactly what it was. The message ended. The final line was 8 words. "We have been through worse. We are not done." I read it 4 times to be certain the translation was accurate. Then I presented it to Vrathsal. He read it. He made a short sound that served as the Vreth equivalent of a brief laugh. Not cruelty. The sound of a person encountering something they find mildly absurd. "Is that a refusal?" he said. "Yes," I said. He ordered the frequency, rebroadcast at double intensity, and told the bridge to begin drafting revised surrender timelines. That night I sat at my terminal and opened the K. Arnold 7 archive again. I read the full entry 3 more times. The survey description noted that the species had a consensus root architecture identical to standard parameters. The frequency had been deployed. The file stopped. Something had found a species that would not stop fighting. Something had solved that problem through means the Vreth had not recorded. I closed the archive. It did not close in my mind. It stayed open. It hummed quietly at the back of everything I did for the next 11 days. The double-intensity broadcast ran for 6 days. The humans kept fighting. I want to be careful about the word fighting here, because it does not carry its full weight on its own. Their technology was behind ours by several significant generations. Their best military hardware was roughly comparable to what the Vreth had been using 2 centuries earlier, before the expansion accelerated. Every tactical projection the fleet ran showed the same result. Any direct engagement with the human military would end in complete defeat for them within 3 hours. Those projections were built on one assumption, that the humans would fight the way every other species in the known galaxy had fought, to survive, to protect the population, to find the point where the cost outweighed the return and stop. That assumption was wrong in a way that took us 11 days to understand. Their forces did not fight to win engagements. They fought to make each engagement cost something. They pulled back from direct confrontation and hit the edges of fleet formations. They struck logistics chains and communication relays and fuel transfer nodes. They targeted things that had no decisive value in isolation and enormous value in aggregate, and they did it with a patience and a controlled fury that should not have coexisted in the same tactical doctrine, but somehow did. The fleet took a strike on day 14 from a weapon the survey team had not catalogued. The weapon had not existed on day 1 of the conflict. The humans had built it during the war. From what remained to them after 2 weeks of sustained frequency bombardment and fleet engagement, some group of people, in some damaged facility with limited resources, had looked at what they still had access to and assembled something new. Vrath Sal read the damage report 3 times. He read the part about the new weapon 4 times. I watched him read it and I did not say anything, because there was nothing in my job description that required me to say what I was thinking, and what I was thinking was not a comfortable thing. I kept monitoring the intercepted human communications, military traffic, logistics, supply chains stretched past their designed limits, a field commander sending a report from a position that any tactical analysis would classify as indefensible, describing the situation in precise, steady terms, and then requesting guidance on how to make the position more expensive to take before it fell. Not how to hold it, not how to evacuate it, how to make it cost more. I translated that report faithfully. I removed nothing. The Vreth Xenobiology team presented their formal findings to the command staff on day 17. I attended. The report was thorough and careful and deeply uncomfortable. The core conclusion was this: the unmaking frequency was working. Human neurological data, gathered from intercepted medical transmissions, showed clear evidence of the frequency reaching the consensus root and performing its intended function. The humans were experiencing the gray, the quiet, the loss of will that had brought 41 civilizations to their knees inside of 2 weeks. They were fighting anyway. The xenobiologist used the word paradox 4 times in his presentation. Vrath Sal asked me after the meeting if I had additional analysis to offer. I told him I was still working on it. This was not entirely untrue. What I did not tell him was what I had been doing with the civilian broadcasts. I had been reading them, not military traffic, civilian communications, people sending messages to family members they had lost contact with, people arguing with their local authorities about resource distribution, and then, in the same transmission, describing what they had contributed to the collective effort. People recording personal accounts of what the frequency felt like from the inside with the same careful precision as that first transmission, as if documentation itself was a form of resistance. The texture of it was unlike anything in my 41 missions of xenopsychology data. I had translated courage before. The Reen had it. The Pell of Meron had it. Courage has a specific quality, formal, weighted, aware of its own significance. It knows it is being brave. This was something different, irritated and loud and continuously rearranging itself around every new obstacle, like something that did not know how to stop, not because of heroism, but because stopping was not one of the options being considered. On day 20, I intercepted a civilian transmission recorded underground based on the acoustic signature of the audio, a woman's voice. The translation software had her language well. Her name appeared in the transmission header, Nina. She was recording a message for someone she called my love. She described conditions outside. She described what the sky looked like through the entrance of wherever she was sheltering. Then she said, "I know it feels like there is no road through this, but I need you to understand something about who we are." She paused for 3 seconds. "We have ended our own world 3 or 4 times already. Floods, famines, wars that took half of everyone alive, things that should have finished us. And every time some stubborn group of us refused to accept that it was over. They were loud and they were exhausting and they were completely impossible to reason with, and they saved us. So I am telling you, we have this. I do not know exactly how. I just know us." The recording ended. I sat at my terminal for a long time. Then I filed it under civilian morale broadcasts, marked it low priority, and kept a separate copy in a folder I did not label. The Vreth command staff met on day 22. The admirals revised the surrender timeline for the 3rd time. The original projection had the humans in formal negotiation by day 18. The revised estimate was now day 60. Nobody in the room said what the silence between each statement contained. I knew what it contained. I had felt it in my own body for 20 years before I trained it out of myself. It was the feeling of a certainty beginning to develop, a crack so small you cannot see it yet, but you can feel it in the structure. The way a bone warns you before it breaks. After the meeting, I opened the Carnal 7 archive one more time. The survey entry was 600 years old. It described the species in standard terms and noted their consensus root architecture was confirmed, present, and accessible. The file stopped there. No conquest record, no integration documentation. Something else had resolved the situation, and whatever it was, the Vreth had not written it down. I thought about 41 civilizations folding. I thought about the shape of each surrender. Different flavors, different grief, different ceremony, but all of them sharing one moment. The moment the cost calculation finished running and the answer came back as enough. I thought about the human field commander, asking how to make an indefensible position more expensive to take. I thought about Nina underground, recording her voice so someone she loved would hear it. I opened a document and began writing in Keth, my own language, which I had not written in 11 years. There was a word we had, a very old one, for the skin that grows back over a wound, not the original skin, something tougher, something with memory built into its texture. Vethashau. I wrote it at the top of the page and stared at it for a long time. The strike that captured the administrative vessel happened on day 29. 3 human ships came in below the fleet's detection threshold. This meant they had been holding position there for at least 40 hours, completely still and patient in a way the Vreth tactical modeling had not assigned significant probability to. They hit the drive systems first, then the communication arrays, then they were alongside and boarding before the defense response could fully organize itself. I was at my terminal when the ship shuddered. The lights changed. The corridor outside my quarters filled with boots. Someone opened my door. I was looking at a human for the first time from a distance shorter than a data screen. She was not what I had expected. I do not know what I had expected. Someone from the briefings, maybe. The shape of a military threat. She was compact and tired in the particular way of a person who had not slept properly in weeks and had decided to keep moving anyway. She held her weapon pointed at the floor rather than at me. I noticed that immediately. "Are you Vreth?" she said. Her language had been in my translation software for 3 weeks by this point. "No," I said. She looked at me, my gray skin, my extra joints, my entirely non-Vreth face. "Okay," she said, "come on." Her name was on her uniform, Priya Anand, Lieutenant. She moved through the captured vessel the way a person moves through a building they have memorized from a blueprint and found accurate, which told me this operation had been planned for some time before it happened. She put me in a small room near the ship center and told me to stay. I stayed. 2 hours later, she came back with food. She set it on the table without explanation and turned to leave. "I can be useful," I said. She stopped. "I am a translator," I said. "I have had access to Vreth strategic communications for 3 weeks, fleet positions, strike coordinates, offensive timing windows. I remember everything." She turned and looked at me for a moment. "Why would you offer that?" I did not have an answer ready. In 41 missions, that question had never come up. The direction of my usefulness had always been obvious, pointing the same way, and I had never needed to examine it. "Sit down and eat something," she said. She left. I sat. I looked at the food. Simple, warm, grain-based. I ate it because there was nothing else to do, and while I ate, I ran the clearest analysis I could of my situation and what survival required from me in it. The analysis kept getting interrupted. Something underneath it kept pushing upward, the way pressure pushes beneath a sealed surface when there is nowhere else for it to go. Priya came back an hour later. without her weapon, with a container of liquid that she held the way a person holds something they are genuinely attached to. She sat down across the small table. "What are you?" she said. "Keth," I said. "My people were integrated into the Vreth administrative structure 211 years ago." "Integrated," she said. "Conquered," I said. "The word depends on who is speaking." She looked at her container. "And you've been working for them ever since." "I have been working with what is available," I said. "It is not always the same as choosing." She was quiet. "Then, what is your name?" "Severeth." "Priya," she said. Not a greeting. Just information offered flat and direct, the way you give someone something they might need. We sat in the small room. The ship was quieter now. The boarding action had concluded. "Tell me about the frequency," she said. I told her everything. The consensus route, the shared architecture, the 41 civilizations and their timelines and their surrender patterns. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet, and then she said, "Sounds like something someone invented to feel better about what they were doing to people." "It is real," I said. "I watched it work 41 consecutive times." "And then there's us," she said. "And then there is you," I said. She turned the container in her hands. "You know what I think it is? I think we have already been through the end of everything. Not once. Multiple times. Floods, plagues, wars that took half the population, climate events that nearly took the rest. We have had so many endings that we have scar tissue for it." The phrase landed in the room. Scar tissue. In Keth, the word is Vethasha. Literally, the skin that remembers, not the original skin, the replacement, the skin that grew back harder with memory built into it. My people had built an entire philosophy around that concept once, before the quiet took it. "Your people," I said carefully. "Every time everything ended, what came after?" "Anger," she said. "Then organizing, then building something new." She paused. "Not always in that order, usually not." I thought of the field commander and the indefensible position. I thought of the weapon that had not existed on day one. I thought of Nina in the underground shelter, documenting what the frequency felt like with the precision of someone taking careful notes about something they intend to survive. "The frequency is affecting you," I said. "Your neurological data confirms it. The quiet, the gray, the erosion of drive. It is reaching the consensus root." "I know," she said. "I felt it, feel it. It is like trying to move through water. Everything costs more." She looked at me steadily. "But we have always been moving through water. We have never had a version of this where it was easy, so we know how to keep moving when the resistance increases." 41 other species. The Reen with their 17 songs. The Pell of Meron with their mathematical prayers. Each one extraordinary in its own way. Each one walking the same path at the end, the quiet deepening, the weight accumulating, the laying down of things that had once seemed worth holding. Not one of them had burned and rebuilt and burned and rebuilt and built again before we arrived. Not one of them had that specific texture. The Vethasha texture, the skin that remembers texture, the scar tissue of a species that had been finishing itself off and refusing to stay finished for its entire recorded history. Priya had to leave twice over the next few hours. I heard her through the door arguing with someone in her command structure. Loudly, with the specific energy of a person who is right and is losing anyway. She came back both times with the tight expression of someone who has accepted an outcome they disagree with and moved forward regardless. The second time she came back, she sat down and said, "They want to transfer you back to the Vreth. Part of keeping the situation from escalating further." "I understand," I said. She looked at me. "Is there anything you want to say before?" There it was. The moment my entire career had been building toward in one direction or another. The place where survival instinct speaks the clearest. Be useful, be quiet, fold in the direction that keeps you alive. Give them nothing that costs you. You have survived 2 centuries by being the most professionally useful, the most perfectly quiet, the most thoroughly folded person in any given room. I thought of the Keth, 211 years ago, sitting down in the road and putting their weapons on the ground. I thought of the word for grief my people had, which I had told myself I could no longer remember. Kalveth, the loss of a thing that was also yourself. I looked at Priya Anand. I have something to give you, I said. She went still. Fleet positions, strike coordinates, the timing windows of the next major offensive campaign. I have had access to command-level communications for 3 weeks. I paused. I remember all of it. She was quiet for a long moment. Why, she said. There was no explanation that fit in the space available. There was no clean professional translation for it. There was only the thing it was, which was a Keth who had forgotten a word and then remembered it, making the only move that the remembered word allowed. It is useful, I said. Take it. She looked at me for a long moment that felt like it contained several years. Then she took out a recording device and held it toward me, and I spent the next 38 minutes giving her everything I had carried for 3 weeks. When I finished, she sat back and looked at what she had received. Then she looked at me. Thank you, she said. Not an administrative courtesy, not the professional gratitude of one useful party toward another, something that meant what it said. I did not know what to do with it. I sat with it the way you sit with something you have not encountered in so long that you have forgotten how to hold it. The fleet rotation shifts in 72 hours, I said. Use the information before then. She stood at the door. She paused. The Keth, she said, they are still out there somewhere, right, your people? Some, I said, scattered across integrated territories. She looked at me for one more moment, then she left. I sat in the small room alone. I opened the terminal in the corner and found an old frequency band, Keth frequency. The Vreth had never bothered to monitor it because nothing administratively valuable had moved across it in 2 centuries. There was no reason to. I opened the channel. I did not send anything. I just opened it and held it. The skin that remembers. I sat there for a very long time in the quiet, which was different now from the quiet I had been trained to maintain. This quiet had something moving underneath it. Priya used the coordinates in 51 hours. I counted everyone. I had not counted time that way since childhood, when my people were still themselves, and I had not yet learned to make myself small. The Keth count time in their own way, marking it in sets of 9, and I sat in the small room and counted in sets of 9 the way my parent had taught me, which was the second Keth thing I had done in 2 days, after writing Vethasha in a document at my terminal. On hour 51, the captured vessel shuddered with the distant pressure of something going correctly a long way away. The lights flickered once. Someone outside my door said something I could not fully hear but whose tone was unmistakable. The tone of a plan executing the way it was designed to execute. 2 hours later, Priya came back. She looked different, not rested. Something that is not the same as rest but sometimes gets confused with it. The look of a person who has been inside something very loud and walked out the other side and is still in the process of confirming that they did. She sat down. Worked, she said. How bad, I said. Bad enough. Their command infrastructure, about 40% of the primary fleet's coordination capacity. They are not finished, but they are, she paused, recalculating. The Vreth do not recalculate, I said. They have not had reason to in 3 centuries. They have reason to now, she said. She looked at the terminal in the corner, at the open Keth frequency channel sitting silent on the screen. She did not ask about it. What does the Vreth response playbook say about this situation? She said. What comes next from their side? I thought through 3 centuries of documented Vreth strategic response. The problem was that 3 centuries of strategy had never needed to account for this exact situation. They regroup, I said. They increase frequency intensity again. They examine the variables they have been miscalculating. And eventually, if none of that produces results, they send someone to talk. She stared at me. Talk. The Vreth are practical, I said. Protracted conflict is expensive. Destroying a planet entirely is wasteful in the extreme. At a certain point, when the math stops working, the most efficient option becomes communication, not surrender. They would never name it that, but reaching out. Priya was quiet. Then, they sent a message this morning. The room felt different for a moment. Formal communique, she continued, addressed to the governing authority of the third planet, which is a generous description of our current situation, the edge of something almost like a smile. They want to open a channel of communication. In 41 missions, I said, the Vreth have never sent that message mid-campaign. They send it after, when the integration process is complete, when they are introducing themselves as the new administrative structure. I looked at her. They are not introducing themselves as administrators. No, she agreed. They do not know what to do, I said. That is what the message means. The message is the uncertainty. The Vreth have not experienced uncertainty about an outcome in 3 centuries. She looked at the other people who had entered the room quietly. An officer she worked with, a compact man named Cal who had the look of someone running on logistics data and commitment in equal measure. Several others, all of them watching me. We need to respond to them, Priya said. Yes, I said. We need someone who understands how they think. I looked at her. She looked at me. Neither of us said the obvious thing. It did not need saying. One condition, I said, after this, when it has resolved enough that there is an after, I want access to the Vreth administrative database, Keth integration records, population locations, survivor registries. Priya held my gaze. I will push for it, she said. I cannot promise. Pushing is enough, I said. She gave me the communication device. I held it for a while, 41 civilizations, 41 formal responses to Vreth authority, each one from a species that was, by the time it wrote the words, already in the process of release. I had translated every one of them. I had made them clean and removed the parts that were too human, too rein, too alive. This one I wrote myself. 8 words. I checked the translation into Vreth 3 times to make sure the meaning held. I showed it to Priya. She read it, then read it again. That's it, she said. That is everything, I said. She looked at the 8 words one more time, then she sent them. We acknowledge your message. We are not done. The same words the humans had sent at the very start, before they had any intelligence about the fleet, before they had the coordinates I gave them, before they had anything except their own instinct, rising from whatever deep structure of themselves had survived every ending they had already been through. They had sent those 8 words from that place. I sent them back from this place. From a Keth who had spent 200 years making other people's surrenders legible, sending them in a different direction for the first time. Vrathzal's response took 6 hours. 6 hours from a Vreth command fleet is information on its own. A 6-hour response window means internal discussion of a kind the Vreth prefer not to have, because the Vreth prefer certainty to discussion, and certainty had been their permanent condition for 300 years. When the response came, I read it twice, then summarized it for the room. They want a face-to-face negotiation, I said, neutral ground at the edge of the system, a formal meeting between designated representatives. Cal said, are they offering terms or asking for hours? They are opening space for terms to be offered, I said. That is not the same thing, but it is meaningfully different from what they have done in every previous engagement. Priya said, what do we ask for? I had been building the answer for hours. 3 things, I said. Cessation of the frequency immediately and completely. Withdrawal of the fleet to a distance that allows your population to begin recovery. And formal acknowledgement, recorded in the Vreth Administrative Archive, that this engagement ended in negotiation rather than in administrative integration. Cal looked at me. Why does the third one matter? Because the Vreth's power is built on inevitability, I said. 41 civilizations, 41 identical outcomes. If the record reflects a 42nd that was different, it stops being a number. It becomes a story. And stories travel further than fleets. Stories arrive at the next species the Vreth approaches. Stories sit in the back of the mind of every integrated civilization that ever stopped fighting. Stories make things possible that the math said were not. The room was quiet for a long time. Priya looked at me, and the Keth. I had kept the Keth out of the formal list deliberately. That is mine, I said. That is separate. She nodded, the nod of someone adding a debt to a ledger they intend to honor. The negotiations took 11 days. I will not describe each one in full because 11 days of negotiation is mostly careful language, extended silences, and the slow work of watching a powerful entity adjust to a reality it did not plan for. Vrathsal led the Vreth side. I occupied a position that had no official name, not representing either party, genuinely useful to both, which is the position I have occupied my entire career, but pointing in a new direction now. On the 7th day, Vrathsal looked at me across the table in the neutral vessel and said in low Vreth, low enough that only I could hear, "You betrayed us." "Yes," I said. "Why?" he said. I thought about the real answer, the one that was not a translation, the one that existed before I learned to make things clean. "Because I remembered a word," I said. He did not ask which word. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression that I could not quite categorize in the Vreth emotional index. Then he turned back to the table and we continued. The final agreement was not everything the humans wanted. The Vreth would not record the engagement as a negotiated settlement. They compromised on the term unresolved, which was accurate in its way. The war was not over. The Vreth were not defeated. The humans were not celebrating a victory in any clean sense, but the frequency stopped. The fleet withdrew to agreed distance. And the word unresolved sat in the Vreth administrative record like a seed in cracked pavement. Small, unremarkable, patient. In 300 years, the Vreth had never had an unresolved entry. The frequency stopped on the 11th day of negotiations. Priya told me that when it stopped, people noticed gradually. Not all at once. Over roughly 2 hours, like coming out of a long and difficult sleep. Not sudden, but unmistakable. The weight lifting. Color returning to the world. People described it in many ways. Priya told me one person said it felt like realizing you had been holding your breath for 3 weeks and finally being allowed to let it go. The fleet withdrew to the agreed distance. On the 13th day, I sat in the small room and looked at the open Keth frequency channel that I had been holding silent for 2 weeks. I pressed send. 4 words. Keth. A language I had not spoken aloud in 11 years. A language I had told myself I had nearly forgotten. A language that turned out to be the one thing I had kept without knowing I was keeping it. The way a person keeps a habit that was first a comfort and then became invisible, and then one day you notice it is still there, unchanged, waiting. I held the channel open after sending. I waited. The response came 40 minutes later. Not 4 words, not 8 words, just sound. A short compressed audio file from equipment clearly very old from somewhere with poor transmission quality, static around the edges of it. Fragile the way very old things are fragile. It was a song. A Keth song. I did not know the specific piece. It was not one I had learned as a child, but it had the shape of a Keth grief song, the old kind, the kind my parent used to hum quietly when they thought I was asleep. The kind without words exactly, because what it carries is too large for the container of words and has to travel instead as melody and intention, feeling its way through the dark between one person and another. Someone was alive. Someone was Keth. Someone had heard the frequency and recognized it and answered. I sat at the terminal. I did not move for a long time. Outside the small room the ship was doing what ships do, full of voices and movement and the machinery of people working toward the next thing. All of that continued. The galaxy continued. The unresolved situation continued because unresolved things do not wait politely while you absorb something. I was not able to absorb it yet. I let it sit alongside me instead. Priya knocked and opened the door without waiting for an answer, which was a thing she did. She looked at me, at the terminal, at the channel back at me. She did not ask. She sat down across the small table, the same table where she had first put food in front of me without explanation, and told me to sit down, the gesture of a person who has limited time and an instinct for what matters. She had her container. She turned it in her hands. We sat together in the small room the way we had learned to sit together, without needing to fill the space, without the performance of ease. Two people from species that had both been through versions of the end of the world and come out of the other side carrying the complicated weight of continuation. Not victory, not resolution. Continuation, which is its own thing, which is, in its own way, the only thing that matters at the end of every ending. I thought of the Reen, their 17 words for grief, the way they sang to their dead, 4 days and they were done. I thought of the Keth, 2 days. I thought of a species that had been burning itself down and rebuilding for its entire recorded history, and somehow never quite managed to finish the job. A species that ran the cost calculation and came back with an answer that did not fit in any model the Vreth had ever built. A species that was, from the cellular level up, made of HFY. Scar tissue. The skin that remembers. I thought of Nina underground, recording her voice for someone she loved. I thought of a field commander making an indefensible position more expensive to take. I thought of a weapon that had not existed at the start of the war. I thought of 8 words sent into the dark before anyone knew who was listening, or what it would cost. We are not done. I had spent 200 years being useful in one direction and quiet in all the others. I had made myself small enough to fit inside any administrative structure without disturbing it. I had translated the end of other people's worlds so many times that I had stopped noticing the weight of it, the way you stop feeling the pressure of something if you carry it long enough. I had also, apparently, kept a frequency band open for 2 centuries, without realizing I was keeping it. The song from the channel had ended. The channel was quiet now, but it was open. It was still open. That was enough for now. I looked at Priya. She was watching me with the particular attention of a person who has learned to read situations rather than ask about them. It is a skill. She was very good at it. There is a word in Keth, I said, for the skin that grows back over a wound, the replacement skin, the one that comes back harder with the memory of what happened to it built in. She was quiet. Vethasha, I said. We built an entire way of thinking around it once, before we forgot. Priya looked at her container. What does it mean for you right now? I thought about it, the real answer, not the translation. It means I have been carrying something for 200 years that I thought was gone, I said. And it was not gone. It was just waiting for the right frequency. She was quiet for a moment, then very simply, yeah, she said, I think I understand that. I held the transmission channel open for a long time after that, waiting to hear if the frequency was still alive. It was. I was not prepared for that.